The scream of hunger was silent, but unmistakable, when Quinn Tanner rounded the corner of the Grand Northern Hotel in Nome, Alaska. Just as the first pale light of dawn crept across the frozen harbor in March of 1899. He stopped short at the sight of a young woman crouched beside the refuse bins, her thin hands wrapped in torn strips of cloth as she picked through potato peelings and discarded bread crusts with the desperate efficiency of someone who had done this before. Her dress hung loose on her frame, patched and repatched until the original fabric was barely visible, and her dark hair fell in tangled waves around a face that might have been beautiful if not for the hollow shadows beneath her cheekbones and the grayish pallor of her skin. She did not hear him at first, too focused on salvaging a half-eaten apple from the mess of coffee grounds and kitchen scraps. Quinn stood there in his worn leather duster, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air, and felt something crack open inside his chest. He had seen plenty of suffering in his 32 years, had witnessed the gold rush turn men into animals and watched fortunes made and lost in a single night at the card tables. But there was something about this particular moment that reached past all his carefully constructed defenses. "Miss," he said quietly, not wanting to startle her. She whirled around with a gasp, the apple tumbling from her fingers back into the garbage. Her eyes were wide and dark, filled with a mixture of fear and defiance that told him she had been chased away from food sources before. She was younger than he had first thought, probably no more than 22 or 23, and despite the dirt smudged across her face and the desperation in her posture, there was something unbowed about her. "I am not stealing," she said quickly, her voice hoarse and accented with something European he could not quite place. "These are things already thrown away. They belong to no one." "I know that," Quinn said, holding up his hands to show he meant no harm. "I was not accusing you of anything. I was just about to head over to the Alaska Cafe for breakfast. Would you care to join me?" She stared at him as if he had spoken in a foreign language. Her lips parted slightly, and he saw the exact moment she began calculating whether this was some kind of trap, whether he was one of those men who offered kindness with one hand and demanded payment with the other. He understood that calculation. Nome was filled with such men, particularly since the gold strike had brought thousands of fortune seekers flooding into this isolated corner of the world. "I have no money," she said finally, lifting her chin. "I cannot pay you back." "I am not asking you to," Quinn replied. He took a slow step forward, then another, moving the way he might approach a spooked horse. "My name is Quinn Tanner. I work claims up on Anvil Creek, made enough this season to afford a hot meal for two, and I hate eating alone. Would you do me the favor of keeping me company?" She searched his face for a long moment, her dark eyes moving across his features as if trying to read his intentions written there. Quinn kept his expression open and honest, though his heart was beating faster than it should have been. He could not explain why it mattered so much that she say yes, only that it did. "Delilah Winters," she said at last, her voice barely above a whisper. "My name is Delilah Winters." "Pleased to make your acquaintance, Miss Winters," Quinn said, and meant it more than any pleasantry he had spoken in years. "The cafe is just 2 blocks over. They make the best sourdough pancakes you have ever tasted, and the coffee is strong enough to wake the dead." Delilah glanced down at her hands, still wrapped in their dirty cloth strips, then at her filthy dress. "I am not presentable for a restaurant. You look just fine to me," Quinn said firmly, "and anyone who has a problem with it can answer to me." Something shifted in her expression then, a crack in the armor of wariness she wore. She nodded slowly and took a tentative step toward him, her legs slightly unsteady. Quinn realized with a fresh wave of anger at the unfairness of the world that she was weak from hunger, that this was not the first morning she had resorted to searching through garbage for sustenance. They walked together through the awakening streets of Nome, past the rows of hastily constructed buildings that had sprung up like mushrooms after rain. Once gold had been discovered in the beach sands. The town was a chaotic mixture of grand hotels and canvas tents, saloons and supply stores, all pressed together in a jumble that reflected the feverish energy of the gold rush. Even at this early hour, there were men stumbling out of gambling halls and others already heading toward their claims with picks and pans. Delilah walked with her arms wrapped around herself. Whether from cold or self-protection, Quinn could not tell. He wanted to offer her his coat, but sensed that might be too much too soon, that she needed to maintain her dignity in whatever way she could. So instead, he matched his pace to hers and pointed out landmarks as they went, keeping up a steady stream of conversation that required no response. "That building there with the green trim is the post office," he said. "Letters take forever to arrive, but it is always exciting when they do. And that saloon on the corner, the Lucky Strike, has the worst whiskey in Alaska, but somehow stays packed every night. I think people go there just to complain about it together." He was rewarded with a small, quick smile that transformed her face for just an instant. It was like watching the sun break through storm clouds, and Quinn felt that strange cracking sensation in his chest widen into something vast and terrifying and wonderful. The Alaska Cafe was warm and bright, its windows already steamed with condensation from the cooking heat within. Quinn pushed open the door and ushered Delilah inside, noting how she hesitated on the threshold as if entering a place she no longer belonged. The owner, a round-faced woman named Martha who had come up from Seattle with her husband 2 years prior, looked up from behind the counter and raised her eyebrows at the sight of them. "Morning, Quinn," she called out. "Your usual table." "Please," Quinn said, guiding Delilah toward a corner booth with gentle pressure at her elbow. He waited until she slid onto the wooden bench before taking the seat across from her, deliberately keeping the table between them to provide space and safety. Martha appeared with 2 tin cups and a pot of coffee that smelled like heaven. She filled both cups without comment, though her eyes lingered on Delilah with an expression Quinn could not quite read. Sympathy, perhaps, or recognition of another woman who had known hard times. "I will bring out pancakes and eggs and bacon for both of you," Martha said. "And some of that berry jam you like, Quinn." "Thank you, Martha," Quinn said warmly. Delilah wrapped her cloth-covered hands around the coffee cup as if it were a precious jewel, letting the heat seep into her palms. She raised it to her lips and took a careful sip, then another, closing her eyes briefly as the warmth spread through her. Quinn watched her over the rim of his own cup and tried not to think about how she had ended up in such desperate circumstances, because if he thought about it too hard, he would want to find whoever was responsible and make them answer for it. "How long have you been in Nome?" he asked instead, keeping his voice gentle and conversational. Delilah opened her eyes and looked at him with that same searching expression from before. 6 weeks, she said. "I came with my uncle. He had heard stories about the gold, about how anyone could make their fortune here. He said we would find a better life." The past tense was not lost on Quinn. "Where is your uncle now?" "Dead," Delilah said flatly. "He died 3 weeks ago, pneumonia. We had spent all our money getting here, and then he spent the rest on a claim that produced nothing. When he got sick, there was no money for a doctor. I tried to work, but—" She trailed off, her fingers tightening around the cup. "The jobs available to women alone in this town are not jobs I was willing to take." Quinn understood immediately what she meant. Nome's dance halls and brothels were always looking for new women, especially pretty ones, and they were not particular about whether those women came willingly or were driven by desperation. The fact that Delilah had chosen to dig through garbage rather than take that path told him everything he needed to know about her character. "I am sorry about your uncle," he said quietly. "That must have been terrible, facing it alone." "He was not a good man," Delilah said, surprising him with her honesty. "But he was the only family I had left after my parents died, and he did bring me here thinking it would be better, even if he was wrong." Before Quinn could respond, Martha returned with 2 plates piled high with food. Golden pancakes swimming in butter, strips of crispy bacon, eggs fried until the edges were lacy and perfect. Delilah stared at the plate as if it were a mirage that might disappear if she reached for it. "Go ahead," Quinn encouraged. "Eat." She picked up her fork with trembling fingers and cut into the pancakes, bringing a small piece to her mouth. Quinn watched her eyes close again as she chewed, saw the way her throat worked as she swallowed. Then she was eating in earnest, trying to maintain some semblance of manners, but clearly ravenous. Quinn started on his own food but kept his attention mostly on her, ready to order more the moment she finished. They ate in silence for several minutes. The cafe filled slowly with morning customers, miners and merchants, and a few bleary-eyed gamblers seeking fortification before sleep. No one paid them particular attention, which was exactly what Quinn wanted. He felt oddly protective of this moment, of the fragile connection forming between them across the scarred wooden table. "Where are you from originally?" he asked when Delilah had slowed down enough to breathe between bites. "Poland," she said. "A small village near Krakow. My parents brought me to America when I was 15. We settled in Chicago for a while, but then they both died in a factory fire. My uncle was my father's brother. He took me in because he had to, not because he wanted to." "That must have been lonely," Quinn said, hearing the story beneath the story. Delilah met his eyes, and he saw that she understood he was not offering empty platitudes. "Yes," she said simply. "Very lonely." "I know something about that," Quinn admitted. "I lost my parents young too. Grew up in an orphanage in St. Louis. Ran away when I was 14 and worked my way west doing whatever jobs I could find. Wrangling horses, herding cattle, mining, guarding stagecoaches. Been drifting for most of my life." "But you have done well here," Delilah said, gesturing vaguely at the breakfast, at his relatively clean clothes and the quality of his boots. "I have been lucky," Quinn corrected. "My claim has paid out better than most, and I have been careful with my money." "But luck runs out eventually, and then what? I guess I have been trying to figure that out." Martha appeared to refill their coffee cups and cleared away Delilah's empty plate, replacing it with another full one without being asked. Delilah looked up at her in surprise, and Martha just winked. "Growing girls need their strength," she said matter-of-factly. "Eat up." Delilah's eyes filled with sudden tears that she blinked back quickly, but not before Quinn saw them. The simple kindness of another woman's understanding seemed to undo something in her that even the food had not quite reached. She whispered her thanks and bent over the second plate, her shoulders shaking slightly. Quinn felt his throat tighten. He took a long drink of coffee and looked out the window at the brightening street, giving her a moment to compose herself. The morning was coming fully alive now, the endless daylight of an Alaskan March beginning its long arc across the sky. In a few more months it would barely get dark at all, and the town would be even more frantic with gold fever and midnight madness. "Miss Winters," he said carefully, "I hope you do not mind me asking, but where have you been staying?" Delilah wiped her mouth with the cloth napkin and folded it precisely before answering. "Nowhere, really. I move around. Sometimes I find an unlocked shed or an empty tent. I try to stay out of sight." "That is dangerous," Quinn said, unable to keep the concern from his voice. "Especially for a woman alone. Nome is not a gentle town." "I know that," Delilah said, a flash of that defiance returning. "But what choice do I have? Every rooming house wants payment in advance, and I have nothing. I have tried to find work, but no one wants to hire a woman with no references and no place to clean up properly. It is a circle with no way out." Quinn made a decision then, one that probably should have taken more thought but felt absolutely right in his gut. "I have a cabin," he said. "Just one room, but it has a good stove and a real bed and a door that locks from the inside. I have been staying there while working my claim. You could stay there." Delilah's expression shuddered immediately. "I told you I cannot pay you." "I am not asking you to," Quinn said firmly. "And before you think the worst, I will be staying somewhere else. I can bunk at the miners' barracks near my claim. It is no hardship. I only use the cabin when I come into town anyway, which is not that often. You would have the place to yourself. Why would you do this?" Delilah asked, her voice sharp with suspicion. "You do not know me. I could be anyone. I could steal everything you own and disappear." "You could," Quinn agreed, "but I do not think you will, and as for why—" He paused, trying to put into words the feeling that had gripped him since he had seen her behind the hotel. "Let us just say I know what it is like to be alone and hungry and out of options. Someone gave me a chance once, a long time ago. A rancher in Colorado who caught me trying to steal one of his horses and gave me a job instead of turning me over to the law. Maybe this is me paying that forward. It was not the whole truth, but it was true enough." The whole truth was that looking at Delilah Winters made him feel something he had not felt in his 32 years of solitary drifting, something that scared and exhilarated him in equal measure. But that was too much to say to a woman he had just met, too much to even fully acknowledge to himself. Delilah studied him for a long moment, her dark eyes searching his face again with that penetrating gaze. "If I accept," she said slowly, "it would only be until I can find work and save enough to get my own place. I will not be a charity case." "I would not expect you to be," Quinn said. "There is no timeline on this. Stay a week, stay a month, stay until you are back on your feet. It makes no difference to me." That was a lie. It made all the difference in the world, but he was not ready to examine why. Delilah drew in a deep breath and let it out slowly. "Then I accept," she said. "Thank you, Mr. Tanner. You are a very kind man." "Quinn," he corrected. "Just Quinn. Then you should call me Delilah." They finished their breakfast in a more comfortable silence. Quinn paid Martha and left a generous tip, earning himself a knowing smile from the cafe owner that made him wonder exactly what she thought was happening here. Outside, the morning was bright and cold, the kind of weather that could burn your lungs if you breathed too deep, but felt clean and sharp after the smoky warmth inside. Quinn led Delilah through the streets to his cabin on the outskirts of town, a solid structure he had built himself from good timber, with a tar paper roof and real glass in the windows. It was small but well made, with a bed in one corner, a cast iron stove, a rough-hewn table and 2 chairs, and shelves where he kept his supplies. It was more than many people in Nome had, and watching Delilah's face as she stepped inside and saw what would be hers to use made something warm bloom in Quinn's chest. "There is wood for the stove stacked outside," he said, moving around the space to show her where things were. "Lamp oil is here, and I will bring more supplies tomorrow. There are blankets in that chest, and the water pump is just out back. It is cold water only, but you can heat it on the stove for washing. The door has a good bolt on the inside, and the windows close tight." Delilah turned in a slow circle, taking it all in. When she looked back at Quinn, her eyes were bright with tears again. "This is too much," she whispered. "You are giving me too much. "It is just a cabin," Quinn said, uncomfortable with her gratitude. "And like I said, I am not using it right now anyway." "It is not just a cabin," Delilah said fiercely. "It is safety. It is warmth. It is a chance to be human again instead of an animal scrambling for scraps. Do you understand what you have given me?" Quinn did understand, maybe better than she realized. He cleared his throat roughly. "There are some clothes in that trunk that might fit you," he said, changing the subject. "They belonged to Martha's daughter before she moved back to the States. Martha gave them to me to sell, but I never got around to it. You should take whatever you need." Delilah moved to the trunk and opened it, pulling out a simple cotton dress that was worn but clean and whole. She held it against herself, and Quinn could see it would fit reasonably well. She looked up at him with an expression that was part joy and part grief, as if being shown kindness after so much hardship was almost painful. "I should go," Quinn said, suddenly aware that they were alone together in a very small space and that, despite his honorable intentions, there was an awareness between them that made his skin feel too tight. "I will come back tomorrow to check on you and bring more food. If you need anything before then, Martha at the cafe knows where to find me." "Quinn," Delilah said as he reached for the door. He turned back and she stepped forward impulsively, reaching out to touch his arm. Even through his shirt sleeve he could feel the warmth of her hand. "Thank you," she said. "I do not have words big enough to tell you what this means to me." "You are welcome," Quinn said, his voice coming out rougher than he intended. "Lock the door after I leave." He stepped out into the cold morning and heard the bolt slide home behind him. He stood there for a moment, his heart racing, before forcing himself to walk away toward the mining district and the barracks where he would now be sleeping on a narrow cot surrounded by snoring men, instead of in his own comfortable bed. He told himself this was just a good deed, just paying forward the kindness that had been shown to him years ago. He told himself he would check on her tomorrow to make sure she was settling in, and then maybe once or twice more, and then she would find her feet and move on, and he would go back to his solitary life. He told himself a lot of things as he walked away from that cabin, but he did not believe any of them. The next morning, Quinn arrived at the cabin with a crate of supplies balanced on one shoulder. He had laid awake most of the night in the barracks, ignoring the cacophony of snores and whiskey-fueled arguments around him, thinking about Delilah alone in his cabin, and hoping she was warm enough, safe enough, sleeping peacefully in his bed. The thoughts had been both comforting and torturous, and when dawn finally came, he had abandoned any pretense of rest and gone straight to the general store to gather things she might need. He knocked on the cabin door and heard movement inside before Delilah's voice called out cautiously. "Who is there?" "It is Quinn," he answered. The bolt slid back and the door opened. Quinn nearly dropped the crate. Delilah stood before him transformed. She had washed, her dark hair now clean and braided neatly down her back, and she wore the cotton dress from the trunk that fit her surprisingly well. Her face was still too thin, but the grayish pallor had faded somewhat, and her eyes were bright and alert. She looked like herself again, like the woman she was supposed to be, and she was achingly beautiful. "Good morning," she said, and there was something almost shy in her smile. "I was hoping you would come." Quinn cleared his throat and hefted the crate. "I brought supplies. Coffee, sugar, flour, bacon, eggs, some canned goods, enough to last you a while." Delilah stepped back to let him in. The cabin was tidier than he had left it, the bed made with military precision and the floor swept clean. She had clearly been up for hours, maybe unable to sleep in such relative luxury after weeks of hiding in sheds and empty tents. Quinn set the crate on the table and began unpacking it, acutely aware of Delilah standing close beside him, watching everything he pulled out with an expression of wonder that made him want to fill the cabin with supplies, to give her everything she needed and more besides. "I also brought this," he said, pulling out a bundle wrapped in brown paper. "It is soap. The good kind, not the lye soap that takes your skin off, and a brush for your hair and some tooth powder. I thought you might like such things." Delilah took the bundle with hands that trembled slightly. She unwrapped it carefully, as if the contents were made of spun glass, and when she saw what was inside, she made a small sound that was half laugh, half sob. "I have not had my own hairbrush in so long," she said wonderingly, running her fingers over the smooth wooden handle. "I have been using my fingers to work the tangles out." "Well, now you have a brush," Quinn said, feeling absurdly pleased with himself. "And whatever else you need, you just tell me and I will get it." Delilah set the bundle down and turned to face him fully. "Why are you doing all this?" she asked again, but this time there was curiosity in her voice rather than suspicion. "And please do not tell me it is just about paying forward a kindness. That may be part of it, but it is not everything. I can see that." Quinn met her gaze and knew he could not lie to her. "I do not entirely know," he admitted. "When I saw you behind that hotel, something in me just recognized something in you, like calling to like. And I thought, here is a person who deserves better than what the world has given her. Here is a person worth knowing. I wanted to help, yes, but I also just wanted to know you. Is that strange?" "No," Delilah said softly. "It is not strange. Or if it is, then I am equally strange because I feel the same. I have thought of nothing but you since yesterday morning. You appeared like something out of a dream, and I keep expecting to wake up and find myself back in the cold, digging through garbage again." They stood looking at each other in the close confines of the cabin, the morning light slanting through the windows and turning everything golden. Quinn could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears. He wanted to step forward, to close the distance between them, to take her in his arms and promise her she would never be cold or hungry again. But it was too soon, too fast, and he did not want to be another man who took advantage of a woman in difficult circumstances. "You are awake," he said instead. "This is real. And I would very much like to keep bringing you supplies and checking on you if that is all right with you. Not because you need charity, but because I would like an excuse to see you, to talk with you, to know more about who you are." A smile spread across Delilah's face, genuine and warm. "I would like that too," she said, "very much." From that morning on, Quinn found reasons to come into town every day. He would bring supplies or some small gift, a bag of peppermint candies from the general store or a newspaper from Seattle that had finally made its way north. They would sit at the small table in the cabin and talk for hours, about everything and nothing, about their pasts and their hopes for the future, about the strange wild beauty of Alaska and the madness of the gold rush. Delilah told him about growing up in Poland, about the green summers and white winters, about her mother who sang while cooking and her father who carved intricate wooden toys for the village children. She told him about the crossing to America, the terror and excitement of it, and about the years in Chicago where they had worked in factories and lived in cramped tenement rooms but had still been happy because they were together. She told him about the fire that had taken her parents, about the uncle who had grudgingly taken her in and then dragged her north on a fool's errand. Quinn told her about his own childhood in the orphanage, about the strict discipline and meager food, and the way he had learned early to keep his feelings hidden and his expectations low. He told her about running away, about the years of wandering, about sleeping under stars and learning to live on his own terms. He told her about the rancher in Colorado who had given him a chance, and about all the places he had been and the things he had seen in his years of drifting. They discovered shared loves. Books, though both had read far too few. Music, though neither could play an instrument. The particular quality of light just before sunrise when the world seemed to hold its breath. They discovered shared dislikes. Cruelty in any form, pretension, the bitter taste of cheap whiskey. They discovered that they made each other laugh, that conversations with each other felt as essential as breathing. Quinn also noticed that Delilah was growing stronger. The hollows beneath her cheekbones filled in, the shadows under her eyes faded, and color returned to her complexion. She moved with more confidence, more energy. She was blooming like a flower given water after a long drought. 2 weeks after their first meeting, Quinn arrived at the cabin to find Delilah outside chopping wood. She had tied her hair back with a strip of cloth and rolled up the sleeves of her dress, and she wielded the axe with competent efficiency. "You do not have to do that," Quinn said, watching her split a log with a clean stroke. "I can take care of the wood." "I know I do not have to," Delilah said, setting up another log. "But I want to. I need to feel useful, Quinn. You have given me so much, and I have given nothing in return. Let me at least contribute what I can." "You have given me your company," Quinn said. "That is more than enough." Delilah lowered the axe and looked at him with an expression that made his breath catch. "Is it, though?" she asked quietly. "Is my company really worth all this?" "Yes," Quinn said without hesitation. 1,000 times yes. Delilah, these past 2 weeks have been the best of my life. Coming here every day, talking with you, seeing you smile. It has made me realize how lonely I have been all these years, how much I was just existing rather than living. You have given me that. You have made me feel alive again. Delilah set the axe down carefully and walked toward him. She stopped just inches away, close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her dark eyes and smell the clean scent of the soap he had brought her mixed with wood smoke and something that was purely her. "I feel the same," she whispered. "You saved my life, Quinn. Not just from hunger and cold, but from something worse, from losing hope entirely. You made me believe that there are still good people in the world, that I still matter, that my life still has value. How can I ever repay that?" "You do not need to repay anything," Quinn said, but even as he spoke he was reaching up to cup her face in his hands, his rough palms against her soft skin. "You just need to be here, to be you. That is all I want." "Is it?" Delilah asked, and there was a challenge in her voice now, a spark of something bold. "Is that really all you want, Quinn Tanner?" He understood what she was asking, what she was offering. "No," he admitted, his voice rough with emotion. "It is not all I want. I want to kiss you. I want to hold you. I want to know what it would be like to wake up next to you every morning for the rest of my life. But I do not want you to feel obligated. I do not want you to think you owe me anything." "I do not feel obligated," Delilah said fiercely. She raised her own hands to cover his where they rested against her face. "I feel grateful, yes, but that is not why I want this. I want this because when I look at you I see home. I see safety and kindness and strength. I see a man I could love if he will let me. Do you understand?" Quinn's answer was to lean down and kiss her. It was a gentle kiss at first, tentative and questioning, but when Delilah made a small sound of pleasure and pressed closer to him, it deepened into something more urgent, more hungry. They kissed standing there in the cold morning air, wrapped in each other's arms, and it felt like finding something Quinn had not even known he was searching for. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Delilah smiled up at him with such joy that Quinn felt his heart might burst from his chest. "Stay today," she said. "Please, stay and just be with me." So he stayed. They spent the day together in the cabin, talking and laughing and stealing kisses like teenagers, making simple meals together and marveling at how easy it was to exist in each other's space. Quinn taught Delilah a card game he had learned in a mining camp in Colorado, and she taught him a Polish folk song that sounded mournful and beautiful, even with his terrible singing voice. As evening approached and the long Alaskan twilight painted the cabin windows purple and gold, they sat together on the bed with their backs against the wall and Delilah's head on Quinn's shoulder. "What happens now?" Delilah asked quietly. "Where do we go from here?" Quinn thought about his claim up on Anvil Creek, about the gold he had managed to pull from the frozen ground, about the small fortune he had been accumulating without any real plan for what to do with it. He thought about his years of drifting, of never putting down roots or letting anyone get close. He thought about how all of that seemed meaningless now compared to the woman resting against him. "I think," he said slowly, "that maybe it is time I stopped drifting. I have enough money saved to start something real. A ranch, maybe, somewhere with good land, or a business here in Nome, something solid. And I think I would like to do that with you, if you want to. No obligation," he added quickly. "I am not trying to pressure you into anything. But if you are willing, I would like to court you properly. I would like to see if this thing between us is as real as it feels." Delilah lifted her head to look at him. "It feels very real to me," she said. "More real than anything has felt in a long time. Yes, Quinn, I want that too. I want to build something with you." They sealed the promise with another kiss, and Quinn knew with absolute certainty that his days of drifting were over. He had finally found something worth staying for. The next few months passed in a blur of happiness. Quinn continued working his claim on Anvil Creek, but spent every spare moment with Delilah. They became a familiar sight in Nome, walking together through the muddy streets as the spring thaw turned everything into a swamp, stopping for meals at Martha's Cafe, where the owner would wink at them and say she had known from the start they were meant for each other. Delilah found work helping Martha in the cafe kitchen, and she threw herself into it with the same determination she brought to everything. Martha paid her fairly and treated her with respect, and having her own money seemed to restore something essential in Delilah that charity alone could not provide. She began saving every penny, planning for a future that now seemed possible. Quinn officially courted her according to all the proper customs he could remember from his years of observation. He brought her flowers when he could find them, which was not often in Alaska, but occasionally someone's hothouse would produce a bloom. He took her to the moving picture show when a traveling projectionist set up a tent theater. They went for long walks along the beach where the gold rush had started, watching the endless process of miners sluicing sand and dreaming together about the life they would build. In July, when the sun barely set at all and Nome was in the grip of gold fever stronger than ever, Quinn sold his claim on Anvil Creek for a sum that made him nearly dizzy. The ground was getting harder to work and the gold was playing out, and he knew it was time to get out while he could still command a good price. He took the money and began making plans. He found a piece of land south of Nome, along the coast where the wind was fierce, but the view was spectacular. It was good grazing land, he was told, and there was talk of the territory expanding, of Alaska becoming more civilized. He could start a cattle operation, or maybe horses, something that would grow and last. But first, he had something important to do. On a warm August evening when the midnight sun still hung low on the horizon, Quinn took Delilah for a walk to a spot where wildflowers grew in defiant patches among the tundra grass. They sat on a flat rock overlooking the Bering Sea, watching the water change color as the light shifted. "Delilah," Quinn said, taking her hand in his, "I know we have not known each other very long, only about 5 months. But in that time I have learned more about myself and what I want from life than in all my 32 years before. You have made me into a better man. You have given me purpose and hope and joy. You have given me a reason to stop running and start building." Delilah squeezed his hand, her dark eyes fixed on his face. "I sold my claim," Quinn continued. "I bought land where we can build a real home. I have enough money saved that we can start a ranch, make something that will last. But none of it means anything if I do it alone. I want to do it with you. I want to build a life with you. So I am asking you, Delilah Winters, will you marry me?" He had not bought a ring, had not been sure how to go about such things. But Delilah did not seem to care. She threw her arms around his neck with a cry of joy that sent seabirds scattering from their roosts. "Yes," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, yes, yes. Of course I will marry you, Quinn Tanner. I love you. I have loved you since that first morning when you offered me breakfast instead of judgment." "I have loved you since then too," Quinn said, holding her tight against him. "I just did not have the words for it yet." They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church Nome had recently acquired. Martha and her husband stood as witnesses, and half the town turned out to watch, because everyone loved a good romance and theirs had become something of a legend. The girl found digging through garbage and the cowboy who had given her everything. Delilah wore a simple white dress that Martha had helped her sew, and she carried a bouquet of wildflowers. Quinn wore his best suit, purchased especially for the occasion, and tried not to fidget nervously as the minister led them through their vows. When he slipped a plain gold band onto Delilah's finger, and she did the same for him, he felt something settle in his chest, something that had been restless and searching for as long as he could remember. They spent their wedding night in the cabin that had been Delilah's refuge and the birthplace of their love. But now it was not refuge, it was celebration. They came together with tenderness and passion, learning each other's bodies and sealing their promises in the most intimate way possible. Afterward, lying tangled together in the narrow bed, Quinn traced patterns on Delilah's bare shoulder and marveled at how his life had changed. "What are you thinking?" Delilah asked, her voice drowsy and content. "I am thinking that I am the luckiest man alive," Quinn said honestly. "I am thinking that if I had not walked behind that hotel at dawn 5 months ago, I would have missed out on the best thing that ever happened to me." "I am the lucky one," Delilah disagreed. "You saved my life." "You saved mine too," Quinn said. "You just could not see how much I needed saving." They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, and when Quinn woke to find Delilah still in his arms, warm and real and his, he knew he would never take a single day of their life together for granted. The following year was filled with hard work and harder weather, but they faced it together. They moved to their new land and began building. Quinn proved to be a skilled carpenter, and with help hired from Nome, they constructed a house that was solid and spacious, with a wide porch and windows that let in the light. They built a barn and corral and spent the summer acquiring horses, good stock brought up from the States at considerable expense. Delilah threw herself into making their house a home. She sewed curtains for the windows and planted a garden that struggled but eventually produced vegetables hardy enough to withstand the Alaskan climate. She learned to cook on the temperamental stove and became expert at preserving food for the long winter months. She corresponded with Martha and occasionally made trips into Nome for supplies and companionship. But mostly, she and Quinn lived in their own world, working side by side during the long summer days and huddling close during the frozen dark of winter. They learned each other's rhythms, their habits and preferences, their fears and dreams. They argued sometimes, because two strong-willed people living in close quarters inevitably did, but they always made up quickly, both having known too much loneliness to waste time on pride. In the spring of 1901, Delilah discovered she was pregnant. She told Quinn one evening after supper, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach while looking into his eyes with a mixture of joy and nervousness. Quinn felt tears sting his eyes, something that rarely happened. "A baby," he said wonderingly. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Delilah asked. "I know we did not plan this so soon." "I am happier than I have ever been," Quinn said, pulling her into his arms. "You have given me everything, Delilah, everything I did not even know I wanted. A home, a purpose, love, and now a family. How could I be anything but overjoyed?" They spent the pregnancy preparing. Quinn built a cradle from wood he had been saving, carving it with careful attention to every detail. Delilah sewed tiny clothes and blankets, marveling at how something so small could take up so much of her heart already. They talked about names and made plans for how they would raise their child, determined that their baby would grow up knowing love and security and endless possibility. In December of 1901, during a particularly brutal winter storm, Delilah went into labor. Quinn rode through the blizzard to fetch the midwife from Nome, a terrifying journey that he barely remembered afterward. The midwife made it back with him just in time, and 12 hours later their son was born. They named him Daniel, and he came into the world screaming his displeasure at the cold, exactly as any sensible person would. But when Delilah held him against her chest and Quinn wrapped his large hand carefully around the baby's tiny head, Daniel settled and opened his eyes, and Quinn fell in love all over again. "He looks like you," Delilah said, exhausted but radiant. "He has your eyes," Quinn countered, though it was probably too soon to tell such things. They sat together in their bedroom, the storm raging outside and the fire crackling in the stove, and marveled at what they had created. This perfect, tiny human who was half him and half her and entirely his own person. The years rolled on, marked by the rhythms of ranch life and the growth of their family. Daniel proved to be a happy baby who grew into an adventurous toddler, and Quinn discovered he loved being a father almost as much as he loved being a husband. He taught Daniel to ride almost as soon as the boy could walk, and they would spend hours together checking fences and tending the horses while Delilah pretended to worry but secretly loved watching her two favorite people together. In 1904, their daughter was born. They named her Rose, because Delilah had finally managed to coax a single rose bush into blooming in their garden, and she had gone into labor while trimming it. Rose was quieter than Daniel had been, more thoughtful, with Delilah's dark coloring and Quinn's stubborn determination. The ranch prospered. Quinn's horses gained a reputation for quality, and he began breeding them specifically for the harsh Alaskan conditions. He hired a few steady men to help with the work, and the operation expanded beyond what he had originally envisioned. They were not wealthy by the standards of the gold barons who had struck it rich, but they were comfortable and secure, which was worth far more. Delilah continued to amaze Quinn with her strength and capability. She managed the household and helped with the ranch work, raised their children with patience and wisdom, and still found time to continue her education by reading every book she could get her hands on. She became a respected member of the small community that had grown up around Nome, known for her kindness and her unwillingness to suffer fools. On a summer evening in 1910, Quinn and Delilah sat together on their porch watching Daniel, now 8, teach Rose, now 6, how to braid rope. The kids were laughing as they tangled the strands hopelessly, and the sunset was painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. "You remember that first morning?" Delilah asked, leaning against Quinn's shoulder in the way that had become second nature to them both. "When you found me behind the hotel?" "Every detail," Quinn said. I remember thinking that you looked like a wild creature, ready to bolt at any moment. And I remember feeling like I was standing at a crossroads, that what I did next would matter more than anything I had done before. You chose right, Delilah said softly. We both did. I did not choose, Quinn corrected. I just followed my heart. It led me straight to you, and every day since then has been a gift. Delilah turned to look at him, and even after 11 years together, his breath still caught at the sight of her. She was 33 now, with fine lines beginning at the corners of her eyes and strands of silver threading through her dark hair, and she was more beautiful to him than she had been at 22. I love you, she said. I will love you until the day I die and beyond. I love you too, Quinn said, pulling her close. You were my salvation, Delilah. You saved me from a life of loneliness and drifting. You gave me everything that matters. We saved each other, Delilah said firmly. That is how the best love works. The years continued to pass, bringing both joy and sorrow as all lives do. They lost their first horse to old age, and Quinn grieved like he had lost a friend. Delilah's garden was destroyed by an early frost one year, and she cried, not for the vegetables but for the failure of something she had worked so hard to nurture. Daniel broke his arm falling from a horse, and Rose came down with influenza that terrified them both until she recovered. But the joys far outweighed the sorrows. They celebrated birthdays and holidays, marking the passage of time with traditions they created themselves. Every year on the anniversary of the day they met, Quinn took Delilah to breakfast at Martha's Cafe in Nome, and they would laugh about how far they had come from that desperate morning. They watched their children grow strong and capable, teaching them everything they knew about working hard and treating people with respect. In 1915, when Daniel was 14 and Rose was 11, they gathered around the kitchen table for a family meeting. Quinn and Delilah had something important to discuss. Your mother and I have been talking, Quinn said, looking at his children's curious faces. The ranch is doing well, better than we ever expected. We have been thinking it might be time to expand, maybe buy the adjacent land that just came up for sale. But that would mean taking on debt, and we wanted to hear what you both think. Daniel, already showing signs of becoming a man, sat up straighter. I think we should do it, he said. This ranch is our future, right? Mine and Rose's eventually. We should make it as strong as we can. Rose, ever the thoughtful one, frowned slightly. But what if something goes wrong? What if the debt becomes too much? That is a fair concern, Delilah said, reaching over to squeeze her daughter's hand. But your father and I have learned something over the years. Sometimes you have to take risks to grow. The key is taking smart risks, calculated ones, and we think this is smart. They talked it through as a family, weighing the options, and in the end decided together to take the leap. The expanded ranch meant more work, but it also meant more opportunity. Daniel threw himself into learning everything he could about horse breeding and training, already seeing himself as his father's eventual successor. Rose developed an unexpected talent for the business side of things, keeping meticulous records and even suggesting improvements to their sales practices. Quinn watched his children with profound pride and gratitude. They were growing into exactly the kind of people he and Delilah had hoped to raise, strong and kind and capable. They knew their own worth, but did not think themselves better than anyone else. They worked hard and dreamed big and loved fiercely. On their 15th wedding anniversary in 1914, Quinn had surprised Delilah with something he had been working on in secret. He led her outside after dinner and showed her what he had built. A greenhouse, properly constructed with glass panels he had ordered from Seattle at considerable expense. It was warm inside, heated by a small stove, and already he had planted the beginnings of a proper garden for her. Delilah had cried, wrapping her arms around his neck and kissing him with a passion that had not dimmed in all their years together. "You did this for me," she had asked through her tears. "I would do anything for you," Quinn had said simply. "You wanted to grow things. Now you can." That greenhouse became Delilah's sanctuary. She spent hours there in the winter months, nurturing plants that had no business surviving in Alaska, but did so anyway through her determination and care. She grew vegetables for their table and flowers just for the beauty of them, and she taught Rose everything she knew about patient cultivation and the rewards of seeing something bloom. In 1920, when Quinn was 53 and Delilah was 43, they received word that Martha had passed away peacefully in her sleep. They attended the funeral in Nome, where it seemed the entire town had turned out to mourn a woman who had been a cornerstone of the community. Afterward, Martha's husband pulled Quinn aside. "Martha wanted you to have this," he said, handing over a small package. "She wrote you a letter before she died, said to make sure you got it." Back home, Quinn and Delilah opened the letter together. In Martha's careful handwriting, she had written, "Dear Quinn and Delilah, if you are reading this, then I've gone on to whatever comes next. I wanted to write and tell you what a privilege it has been to know you both and to witness your love story from the very beginning. Quinn, I will never forget the morning you brought Delilah into my cafe, the way you looked at her like she was something precious you were afraid might disappear. And Delilah, the way you looked at him like he was the answer to prayers you had stopped believing would be heard. I knew then that I was seeing something special. You two have built a beautiful life together, raised wonderful children, and shown this rough town what real love and commitment look like. Thank you for letting me be a part of your story. Remember me fondly, and keep taking care of each other. All my love, Martha." They cried together over the letter, mourning the loss of their friend but grateful for her presence in their lives. That night, lying in bed, Delilah said thoughtfully, "We should do something to honor her memory, something meaningful." After much discussion, they decided to establish a fund to help women in difficult circumstances, women like Delilah had once been. They worked with the church in Nome to create a program that would provide temporary housing and job assistance to women who needed a chance to get back on their feet. They called it Martha's Fund, and it became one of their most important legacies. The years rolled on toward 1926. Daniel grew into a fine man and took over more and more of the ranch operations, though Quinn still worked alongside him every day, unable to imagine fully retiring. Rose surprised everyone by falling in love with a schoolteacher who had moved to Nome from Oregon, a quiet, thoughtful man named Peter who worshipped the ground she walked on. They were married in 1923, and Rose continued to live nearby, helping with the ranch business while also starting her own family. Quinn and Delilah became grandparents in 1924 when Rose gave birth to a daughter, and then again in 1925 when Daniel's wife, a spirited woman named Catherine he had met at a horse auction, delivered twin boys. The house that had once seemed so large was now filled regularly with the chaos and joy of grandchildren, and Quinn discovered that being a grandfather was somehow even more wonderful than being a father. On a June morning in 1926, Quinn woke before dawn, as he always did. He looked over at Delilah still sleeping beside him, her hair now more silver than dark but her face peaceful in rest. 27 years they had been married, 27 years of building a life together from absolutely nothing. He thought about that girl digging through garbage, about the desperation and despair she had carried, and about the woman she had become. Strong, confident, beloved. He thought about his own younger self, drifting and rootless, convinced that was just how life was meant to be. He had been so wrong. Life was meant to be exactly this. Waking up next to the person you loved, knowing your children were happy and thriving, seeing the evidence of your hard work and dedication everywhere you looked. Delilah stirred and opened her eyes, smiling when she saw him watching her. "Good morning," she murmured. "What are you thinking about so seriously?" "I am thinking about garbage," Quinn said, and laughed at her confused expression. "I am thinking about how I found the greatest treasure of my life next to a pile of garbage behind a hotel." Delilah laughed too, that rich, warm sound he would never tire of hearing. "You found me," she corrected, "and I found you, and together we found everything else." "Together," Quinn agreed, leaning over to kiss her. "That is the important word. Everything good in my life happened because I stopped drifting alone and started building with you." "You gave me breakfast that morning," Delilah said, reaching up to touch his face. "Such a simple thing, really. A meal. But it was more than food, it was dignity, it was hope. It was the beginning of everything." They rose together and started their day, moving through the rhythms they had perfected over nearly 3 decades. Coffee first, strong and hot. Then breakfast, which they still ate together every morning without fail. Then out to the barn to check on the horses, walking hand in hand like the young lovers they still were in all the ways that mattered. Daniel met them there, already hard at work, and they spent the morning discussing plans for the summer breeding season. Rose stopped by around noon with the grandchildren, and they all gathered for lunch on the porch, the kids running wild in the yard while the adults talked and laughed. In the afternoon, Quinn and Delilah stole away for a walk like they often did, following a trail they had worn through the tundra grass over years of walking together. They did not need to talk much anymore, comfortable enough in their shared silence to simply exist together. "Do you have any regrets?" Quinn asked as they stood looking out over their land at the house and barn and corrals they had built, at the life they had created. "Not a single one," Delilah said firmly. "Everything difficult I went through led me to you. How could I regret that? What about you?" "No regrets," Quinn said. "Well, maybe one small one. I regret that I did not find you sooner so we could have had even more time together." "We have had enough time to build a beautiful life," Delilah said, leaning against him. "And we will have more time still. We are not done yet, you and I. There are still grandchildren to spoil and horses to raise and sunsets to watch together." "Then let us make sure we appreciate every moment," Quinn said, turning to face her and taking both her hands in his. "Because you are still the best thing that ever happened to me, Delilah Tanner. Every single day with you is a gift." "And you are my gift," Delilah said. "My cowboy who saw someone worth saving when everyone else saw trash to ignore. My partner who built dreams into reality. My love who made me believe in happy endings." They kissed there on their land, surrounded by everything they had created together, and Quinn felt the same surge of joy and rightness he had felt that first morning in the Alaska cafe 27 years ago. Some things never changed, never faded. Some loves were built to last forever. That evening, the whole family gathered for dinner. Daniel and Catherine with their twins, Rose and Peter with their daughter and another baby on the way. They crowded around the large table Quinn had built years ago, passing dishes and telling stories and laughing at each other's jokes. The house was filled with noise and warmth and life. After dinner, when the grandchildren were playing quietly in the corner and the adult children were cleaning up, Quinn and Delilah slipped outside to watch the sunset. It was something they did nearly every evening, a ritual that had become sacred to them both. "I was thinking," Delilah said as they settled into the porch swing Quinn had hung last summer, "we should write our story down, for the grandchildren so they know where they came from." "That is a good idea," Quinn Quinn said, "though I am not much of a writer." "We will do it together," Delilah said. "We will tell them about Nome in 1899, about the gold rush and the cold and the desperation. We will tell them about a girl who hit rock bottom and a cowboy who offered her breakfast. We will tell them about how love can save you, how building something together is worth more than any gold you could pull from the ground. We will tell them about choosing each other every single day," Quinn added. "About working hard and staying faithful and never giving up, even when things got difficult." "Yes," Delilah agreed. "We will tell them all of that. We will tell them that happy endings are real, but only if you are willing to work for them." They sat together as the sun painted the sky in magnificent colors, as they had done thousands of times before, and would do thousands of times more if fortune allowed. Two people who had found each other against impossible odds, who had built something lasting from nothing, who had proven that the greatest treasures in life were the ones you created yourself through love and dedication, and sheer, stubborn determination. The garbage behind the hotel was long gone, swept away by time and progress. But the breakfast Quinn had bought that dawn morning had sustained them through 27 years and counting. It had been the first of thousands of meals shared, thousands of moments treasured, thousands of acts of love both grand and simple. And it would sustain them for all the years to come, because some beginnings were so strong they echoed through entire lifetimes. Some loves were so true they became legends. And some cowboys were wise enough to recognize treasure even when they found it beside the trash. Quinn pulled Delilah closer, and she rested her head on his shoulder, and they watched the sun set on another beautiful day in the life they had built together. Behind them, through the windows, they could hear their family laughing and talking, the sound of happiness and belonging. Ahead of them stretched more years, more sunsets, more moments to treasure. "Thank you," Quinn whispered into Delilah's hair. "For what?" she asked. "For digging through that garbage," he said. "For being hungry and desperate and in exactly that place at exactly that moment. For saying yes to breakfast, for giving me a chance, for building this life with me, for everything." Delilah tilted her head up to kiss his jaw. "Thank you for stopping," she said, "for seeing me when I was invisible, for offering kindness when you could have walked away, for loving me even when I could not love myself, for being my home." They sat together as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, two people who had become one through years of shared joy and struggle, and they were content, not because their life had been easy, because it had not been. Not because they had never faced hardship, because they certainly had, but because they had faced everything together, and together they had built something that would last long after they were gone. Their love story had started with garbage and breakfast and a single act of kindness, but it had grown into something magnificent. A family, a legacy, a testament to the transformative power of seeing the worth in another person and choosing to honor it. It was a story that would be told for generations, passed down to children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, a reminder that the greatest treasures are often found in the most unlikely places, and that true love can save you if you are brave enough to accept it. As the last light faded from the sky and the night wrapped around them like a blanket, Quinn and Delilah Tanner sat together on their porch in Alaska, surrounded by the life they had built, and they were happy. Completely, perfectly, eternally happy. And they knew, as surely as they knew the sun would rise tomorrow, that they would face whatever came next together, hand in hand, heart to heart, for all the days they had left and in whatever came after. Their story was complete, a circle closed, a promise kept, and it was beautiful.